It's my great pleasure to introduce and to ask Marija Pijaca to come. Marija Pijaca is our dear colleague and friend, working in Southern University, teaching maritime law and as well as commercial law, and she was part of the project where we worked together, and she was always interested in seafarers, and today she's going to give us a presentation about the influence of the COVID pandemic on the seafarers. And Marija, please join us here. The floor is yours.
Esteemed colleagues, I would first like to greet you all. It's really a pleasure to be here in Dubrovnik, and it's really a pleasure to be part of International Maritime and Transport Law course here in Dubrovnik at the center. So, as you know, this morning's session is dedicated to COVID-19 pandemic and maritime law. So, in the spirit of same topic, and also this presentation will be dedicated to same subject. So as you can see, the title of this presentation is COVID-19 pandemic and its consequences to repatriation of seafarers. First of all, I would like to say why I chose this subject and actually what is the aim of this presentation. So I think that the reason for choosing this subject is very clear, and I hope that you all know that during 2020 and also during 2021, so many seafarers were forced to stay on board their ships long after their employment agreement expired due to COVID-19 pandemic. And it was really impossible for seafarers owners, ship owners and for ship operators to organize crew change and repatriation of seafarers during this new situation in the world. So these problems were actually the reason to choose this topic. And also the aim of this presentation is to highlight problems the pandemic caused for the shipping industry, primarily the issue of repatriation of the seafarers, because it's a burning problem in shipping industry. Also, the issue of the breach of the provisions of the term of seafarers' employment agreements is also related to these problems. That's the reason why I also will mention and that problem. So the breach of the term of seafarers' employment agreements, I will mention also with this problem together, crew change and repatriation. So in this presentation, after introduction, I will first analyze the provisions regarding the term of seafarers' employment agreement. Then we will see some examples of absence of repatriation of seafarers during COVID-19 pandemic, and also we will see some procedure lists for seafarers when embarking or maybe disembarking a ship, and then we will spice it up a little bit with some legal sources enacted to facilitate crew change and repatriation. First of all, with United Nations resolution on international cooperation to address challenges faced by seafarers as a result of COVID-19 pandemic to support global supply, and also we will see some IMO industry recommended framework of protocols, and also the Nectar Declaration, which is also important for crew change and repatriation. And finally, at the end, I will summarize the above. I found one interesting fact which says that each month about 150,000 seafarers need to be changed over to it and from the ship they operate to ensure compliance with international maritime regulations. First of all, with maritime regulation in the field of safety, and we all know that safety is first on board always, and also with international maritime regulation from the field of crew health and prevention of their footage. But as I said, during these last 2 years, so many seafarers were waiting on board. They were forced to stay on board their ships and long after their employment agreements expired. So there was huge issue for seafarers employers to organize crew change and repatriation for them. Also, on the other hand, seafarers who stayed home for longer period of time were prevented from boarding a ship. So they didn't have a chance to board, they didn't have a chance to have their fundamental rights. So it was, on the both sides problems. So although seafarers were understanding at the beginning of the pandemic, it soon became clear that seafarers must be allowed crew change and repatriation urgently. So it was really a sign that we have to do something with these problems. Why? Because it is important to note that a long stay of seafarers on board is incapable and goes against the fundamental rights of seafarers which are set out in international conventions. I mentioned earlier international conventions from the field of safety, then also international conventions in the subject of prevention of pollution, marine pollution from ships, and so on and so on. So several international organizations, first of all, United Nations, International Maritime Organization as well, and also maritime industry, it means ship owners, ship charters, ship operators and so on, and also labor organizations approached the relevant authorities and issued guidance documents to facilitate crew change and repatriation, while at the same time taking steps to minimize the risks of coronavirus disease. So why was so difficult for seafarers to go home? Simply because governments around the world have suspended international flights, then they closed borders, ports, airports, and imposed travel restrictions to foreign nationals. And because of these restrictions, actually we have, a situation that seafarers can go between workplace and country of residence and back. So, of course, several important legal sources have been enacted for the purpose of carrying out crew change and repatriation. First one is this United Nations General Assembly resolution from December 2020 with the title International Cooperation to Address Challenges Faced by Seafarers as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic to support the global supply chains. And there is also IMO's industry recommended framework of protocols. It means there are more than one protocol for ensuring safe ship crew change and travel during the coronavirus pandemic. And also there is an Nectar Declaration on seafarers' well-being and crew change from January this year. Of course, there are some national legal sources. For example, in our country, in the Republic of Croatia, we have measures of Ministry of Sea Transport and Infrastructure for seafarers who are unable to renew all documents. It means different certificates according to STCW convention regarding for services on board. So the issue of the breach of the provisions on the term of seafarers employment agreements is, as I said, is also related to these problems of organizing crew change and repatriation. So that's the reason why I also I mean, it's necessary also to mention the term of employment agreements or contracts. So the term of an employment agreement which seafarers concludes with an employer actually depends on the branch, sorry, of the shipping industry. I think this is actually usual or standard conditions usually which we can see in the practice. For example, in offshore industry, an employment agreements are usually concluded for a period of 2 to 3 months, and in the rest of shipping industry such as carriage of goods by sea, and employment agreements are usually concluded between 4 to 6 months. But as I said, this is usual standard, but it's not often like that. So when seafarer is on the board at the sea, he or she or they often work 10 to 12 hours shifts, and even 7 days a week. So it's a really tough job, it's a really hard job. So the term of employment agreement and provisions of the term of employment agreements we can of course find in international legal sources. For example, according to Maritime Labor Convention, maximum continuous period that a seafarer should serve on board the vessel without leave is 12 months. Also, according to Maritime Labor Convention, after the expiry of the agreement, the seafarer is entitled to repatriation at the expense of the ship owner. And if a ship owner's employment agreement expires before, if there is a reasonable reason for that, the seafarer has the right to request repatriation. So that's what we can see from international sources. And although at the beginning of pandemic we had a situation that flag countries asked seafarers to extend the terms of their employment agreement in the middle of the year, actually in June 2020, the standpoint of the International Transport Workers Federation, it was ITF, was that the extension of the employment agreement was not an capable option, So it was definitely crucial moment to do something in this field. But in the meantime, there were so many examples of the absence of repatriation of seafarers during Corona pandemic. For example, one of the examples is the experience of the crew of motor vessel Zagreb of the company Atlantska Plovidba here from Dubrovnik, who requested to leave the ship after more than a year spent on board. Just try to imagine to be more than a year on the board. In this case, the intervention of Croatian Seafarers Union was required. So after a long time, at the end, finally, the crew was allowed to disembark in the port of Singapore, and also several other solutions were offered so that the crew could leave the ship, including also some of them were disembarking also in the port of Philippines. Also, one of the examples is also the crew change on the motor vessel Obrovac. It's a vessel of Tankerska Plovidba from Zadar. So the crew change on that vessel in the port of Singapore was carried out in the third attempt. Just try to imagine that, in the third attempt. Why? Simply because port authorities refused to allow the crew change on board the ship which entered the port for bunkering. So they came in the port for bunkering. In other words, they didn't have cargo loading and disloading, and that's the reason why port authorities said you can't do crew change in our port. And after long repeated existence of ship owner, finally crew change and repatriation were carried out. Of course, because of this problem, the ship owner had really high costs. So we all know situation, of course, in the cruise industry. So according to the statement of issued by IMO from June last year, as many as 70,000 crew members on cruise ships worldwide waited for repatriation. So we all know the situation that COVID had huge impact on cruise industry. So I think that these numbers clearly illustrate the scope of the problems of inability to change crew and repatriation on cruise ships during the pandemic at that time. Based on the industry analysis of International Chamber of Shipping, the numbers of seafarers requiring repatriation after finishing their contracts had declined from a high of around 400,000 in September 2020 to around 200,000 as of March 2021. And because of this, we can say that crew change crisis is not resolved, but we can say that it has been manageable. That's probably a good word to explain situation at the moment. Of course, procedure lists are very important for seafarers when embarking and disembarking the ship, simply because to reduce number of absence of repatriation countries, port countries comply the list of procedure for seafarers when embarking or disembarking the ship. I have to say that there is no unique procedure list for each country, and we all know that the list depends on the measures adopted by individual country. Situation is changing rapidly, so in the practice there were some situations when, for example, seafarer were, I don't know, on the way for his place to work, and then during flight some procedure lists in some port country changed. So what different procedural lists of different port countries have in common is that definitely mandatory COVID-19 tests. PCR test is mostly used due to its reliability, and usually costs of such tests are paid by seafarer's employer, which is good to know because sometimes these tests are expensive. Also, test results and some other information on the voyage must be visible in fit for travel certificate, and also certain countries require stay-home notice. It means self-isolation for seafarers before embarking or maybe disembarking a ship, which lasts for 14 days, maybe in some countries, and 10 days, it depends. Also, some countries require all the above, including and self-isolation upon arrival at the port country or after coming on board. So all the above we can put in one sentence and say that different countries truly have different requirements regarding this issue. So it's pretty much a mess in this field. So great help to seafarers when searching for information on procedure lists for embarking or disembarking of ships are definitely maritime agents. For example, an interactive world map, you already saw the same map and before, showing ports in the world is actually available on the website of Wilhelmsen. That is one of the largest maritime agents in the world. So this map works like, you know, after selecting a country, seafarers have access to information on the rules and also restriction in certain country, and the map is updated twice a day so that the information is always up to date, and it's good to know. But you know, huge help for seafarers are also and P&I clubs. For example, I found really interesting web page of United Kingdom P&I, UK P&I club, and if you want, it's really nice to see how they clearly explain procedure lists at the moment in different ports, and also similar information is also provided and by some other companies, for example, such as this one here, Inchcape and GAG. So if you want, you can also check on these web pages. Some legal sources and methods to facilitate crew change and repatriation. So several important legal sources have been enacted in this field. I already mentioned United Nations General Assembly resolution and also International Maritime Organization industry recommended framework of protocols, as well as Neptune Declaration on Seafarers well-being and the crew change. In my opinion, these are three most important legal sources in this subject. That's why I put it in this presentation. So United Nations resolution, among others, urges member states to designate seafarers and also other maritime personnel as key workers. I think this moment was also crucial to designate seafarers as key workers. For example, here is the list of the member states that have designated seafarers as key workers. So we can see here Croatian and Italy and Sweden and Montenegro and Poland and Spain on the same list. Also, this resolution, among others, encourages government and also other stakeholders to implement these IMO protocols. It means industry recommended framework of protocols for ensuring safe ship crew change and the travel during the COVID-19 pandemic. And also, this resolution calls upon governments to promptly implement relevant measures to facilitate maritime crew change and repatriation. So these are most important provisions from the same resolution. As we said, United Nations resolution, among others, encourages governments to implement IMO protocols. It means these protocols, actually there are two protocols in IMO industry recommended framework. First one is for joining a ship, and second protocol is for leaving a ship. So the objective of the protocols for joining a ship is to facilitate safe travel of seafarers to join ships for the purpose of conducting crew change, and also the objective of same protocol is to ensure that effective measures are applied to manage and control the risk of seafarers becoming infected with coronavirus and so on and so on. Also, the objective of the protocols for leaving a ship and repatriation is to facilitate safe travel of seafarers in order to be repatriated, and also to ensure that effective measures are applied to manage and control the risks of seafarers becoming infected with coronavirus throughout the process of traveling, for example, via aircraft or maybe with some other models of transport from their place of residence to another country to place of their work. And also, I mentioned earlier that there is as well as Nectar Declaration on seafarers' well-being and crew change. It's also interesting legal source. So according to same declaration, the most effective way of addressing crew change challenge and building maritime logistic chain is actually to work together, or like they say in the declaration, by working together across the value chain with industry stakeholders, organizations, and with governments to implement solutions that work in progress. So Neptune Declaration actually recognizes that we all have to share kind of responsibility to ensure that crew change crisis is resolved as soon as it's possible. So to make these improvements, it was really necessary to do some changes. So the Neptune Declaration say that it is really necessary to recognize, first of all, seafarers as a key workers. We saw that provision earlier in the United Nations resolution. And also, it was important, according to Neptune Declaration, to give to seafarers priority access to COVID-19 vaccine. This declaration is from January this year. So in that time, we are still trying to figure out how we will do this part. So Neptune Declaration said that seafarers should have priority to COVID vaccines. Also, it was necessary, according to Nectar Declaration, to establish and implement gold standard health protocols based on existing best practice. And also there is a provision which says that it's necessary and to increase collaboration between ship operators and charterers as well to facilitate crew change. And also, according to Nectar Declaration, it was necessary also to ensure air connectivity between key maritime hubs and seafarers. So, as I said, this relation and this provision about collaboration between operators, ship operators and charters is pretty much interesting. So according, for example, the Nectar Declaration, ship owners and the charterers should share relevant information and collaborate to ensure that necessary crew change can be carried out with the less impact possible in terms of costs and also delays. I mean, it was good for them to put such a provision in this declaration. And also they say in declaration, there is also provision that no charter contracts should contain clauses preventing necessary crew change. It was really interesting for me to see, for example, this kind of provisions. So to summarize the above, I would like to highlight once again that long stay of seafarers on board is incapable, and it goes against fundamental rights of seafarers, which are set out in international conventions, and also the issue of the breach of the provisions on the term of the seafarers' employment agreements is related to these problems, crew change and repatriation. That's the reason why I also mentioned that problem in this presentation. We saw how important rule have procedure lists. So procedure lists for seafarers when embarking and disembarking the ship, and different countries truly have different procedure lists. So there is no unique list, we all know that, and that list depends on the measures in each country. Also, we saw several important legal sources which have been taking in an important step in regulation the rights of seafarers to repatriation and the organizing crew change. We saw that all of them highlight seafarers as a key workers. That was important parts of these sources. So at the moment we are still in the middle, maybe in the middle, but we are still, the pandemic is still on, and we don't know what will be this winter and maybe next spring. So I think it is important regarding this situation not to allow to return of the problems of organizing crew change and repatriation of the seafarers. I think that these issues, crew change and repatriation, should be imperative. So crew changes and repatriation are important because they are vital to prevent fitness and protect seafarers' health and also safety and well-being, and they have really important role in maritime trade. So crew change and repatriation cannot be postponed indefinitely. So that's my opinion. Thank you very much for your kind attention.